Chris Fox, I'm Chief Legal Officer at Canby, a B2B sports betting company.
Krishka Shanmugam, I am the Legal Operations Manager.
Hello, I'm Atiq Ahmed, I'm the Associate General Counsel at TradeIX.
Hi, I'm Grace Etchers, I'm a trainee solicitor at Canby, and today we're going to be talking about the top tips for moving in-house from private practice. First question for everyone, can you please tell me what were the main differences that you saw when you first moved in-house?
I think the biggest thing that I noticed was the speed at which everything goes. You know, you are thrown so many different things from day one and you just have to get on board and just run with it. Whereas I think when I was working in private practice, it was like, this is the one thing that I'm working on. I'm going to be working on it for a few weeks. It was a little bit slower in terms of pace.
Yeah, I would echo the fact that I think it's fast-paced. I think you also have to be more generalist. So I moved from a training contract in private practice where you obviously do 4 seat rotations and it's very focused in each discipline. And then when I was in-house, I was suddenly this generalist lawyer that was working on private contracts, public sector contracts, tax, regulatory, procurement. So it was a different pace and it was more generalist, and we were expected to be able to turn our hand to more things.
So Grace, I've been in-house now for 6 years, worked in traditional in-house insurance companies before moving to a fintech startup. I think the biggest sort of change for me was culturally. I think in private practice there's a certain mode and mentality as to how you portray yourself as a private practice lawyer with your client bases. When you're in-house, suddenly your whole mindset about being commercial, about being business aware really opens up. You're a lawyer in a wider team that does what the business is requesting you to do. So you really have to understand what business strategy is about, what the commercial sphere is of the advice that you're giving, and you've really got to be something more of a general commercial minded legal advisor. I
think that's a really interesting point, because there is such a drive towards commercial awareness. In private practice, everyone says that you've got to be commercially aware, but I'm not entirely sure that everyone in private practice really understands what that means, even when they're saying it. And I think probably the distinction is that there's a drive to be commercially aware when you're in private practice, but that drive is coming from other lawyers, and these lawyers have gone through the system. Whereas the drive to be commercially aware when you're in-house is coming from the business. It's coming from people with totally different backgrounds, different skill sets and different mentalities. And I think that's why you have to undergo somewhat of an evolution when you're an in-house lawyer to really embrace the business and to be able to be strategic.
It's a really good point, Chris. I mean, when we think about when you take instructions as a private practice lawyer, when you take them in-house, whenever you take these instructions in-house, you're always thinking about the actual sphere on what the instruction is. So where the instructions come from, what the urgency is to it, the priority to it, and what actually is the business trying to achieve. And that will give you the kind of length which you need to look at that contract or that piece of advice with. So it's really taking what we're thinking and looking at to be commercial awareness and applying a very kind of specific business mindset to what that means in the legal advice that you're giving.
Could any of you give me an example of a situation where you've noticed someone who's made the jump and it hasn't really worked out, or they haven't really enjoyed it, and what were the reasons for that?
I have come across certain cases where people who have they've been their first in-house job, they've trained private practice, have come in-house and sort of struggled with really letting go of the legal risk of a contract, for example. Because obviously when you're doing a contract, you're really doing it for the business, for whatever their commercial purpose is. And when you're working in private practice, you're really just trained to look for the legal risk and try and minimize that as much as possible. And what ends up happening is that the contracts get negotiated for way too long, you miss deadlines, that kind of stuff. It's basically just understanding that you have to balance the legal risk with the commercial reality of what the business is facing. And I think that's really something that a lot of people first initially struggle with.
How would you guide someone through that when they first make the jump? How would you sort of lead them into the mentality of, now we're making more of a commercial decision here as opposed to a legal risk?
When somebody first moves, I think, from private practice to in-house, I think it's still a responsibility and onus on an in-house team leader, the manager, to kind of bed them into the in-house team, because it can sometimes be quite a culture shock. It can be something that's very different. You're not sort of billing, time recording, you haven't got that system of peer review as much. When you're in-house, you're essentially having to adopt a more versatile and adaptable kind of mindset. The business drivers for the instructions you're given, and also the way that you portray yourself to the business, your interrelationships to people in the business, is quite different to what you might find in private practice, where you have this lawyer-client relationship. In-house, it's kind of everyone is part of the same team. So you're finding a way to kind of sometimes back, challenge people, but also be their friend. So it's really understanding what more of the people attributes you need and are required to be successful in-house.
In terms of how your manager can help you when you first make that jump, what points would you make there?
Bedding someone into a team, getting them to know all the stakeholders that they're going to be working with, getting them to understand the business and helping them to understand risk is probably, those would be my top tips for an in-house move.
One interesting thing about this move from private practice to in-house is I've come across this instance where people think about in-house as some kind of one homogenous whole, whereas actually in-house there are many different spheres of how in-house team cultures actually look themselves. So one of the things that's really key for any kind of private practice lawyer looking to come in-house is actually what kind of culture do you think would most suit you? And that's really something that's a determination you've got to make at the source, before you start kind of approaching companies, interviewing, putting your CV in, is think about where is it that I think in-house would best suit me as a lawyer. And it could be that some of these places do have more of a private practice sort of approach to how they look at work, and some be completely different. But I always say the underlying theme is always commerciality and being business-minded, because in any in-house team that you ever work for, you have to understand what the business drivers are for the pieces of advice that you give and exactly what this business is trying to achieve in what it's trying to do. So really think that's my kind of better answer towards culture. It's just understanding what culture means in different in-house teams is important.
I think also just sort of understanding what your personal skills and attributes are. If you wanted to work in a bank environment, there might be particular skills that are quite relevant there that you as a private practice lawyer have that are quite suitable there, whereas in a tech sort of world, for me at least, the reason why I wanted to go in-house in tech particularly is because I wanted to work in a fast-paced environment where you hit the ground running, you immediately are involved in strategy and in like this innovative place, and that's sort of what I wanted to do, and I knew that I had the skills and the attributes that would help me with that. So yeah, I think really understand like what your skill set is and where can you really shine the most if you're going to go in-house.
Thank you so much, everyone. If we could just wrap up by giving your top tip for moving in-house.
Understand that coming from private practice, moving in-house, you're not going to be able to be as perfect as you want to be. You aren't going to be able to have the Rolls-Royce model just because of the sheer amount of things that are being thrown at you. So you're going to have to settle for the Mini Cooper model of it, and that's good enough. You have to understand that this is a growing, thriving business. You got to meet your deadlines. You got to just move on to the next thing.
I think I'd say that it's being commercial, but being commercial specific to the company that you're working in. So understand the drivers of your stakeholders, understand the strategic direction of the exec, really go in open-minded, talk to as many people as possible, build those relationships, and then build that commercial approach that enables you to properly deliver against the company's strategic objectives.
My biggest top tip would be really make sure you understand your motivations, your desires and your reasons for wanting to move in-house from private practice. So really do your research around different types of companies in-house, do your research into culture, do your research into what you think it is you're trying to gain and achieve from that move in-house that you're not seeing in private practice. In doing that kind of root cause kind of analysis of your own career at that stage, you'll make an erudite decision in terms of whether you should be moving in-house or not.
The one thing that strikes me is culture, and knowing where you want to be and which culture you want to be in is hugely important. And I always knew that I wanted to be in-house and train in-house for that reason. So I would tell prospective trainees to really think about that as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Those were our top tips for moving in-house from private practice. I'm Grace.
I'm Karishka.
I'm Chris.
I'm Atik.
And thank you for watching.